They say desperate people make bad choices. I didn't think taking a night shift job at a diner would be one of them. I was down on my last 20 bucks. Rent was overdue. My car barely had enough gas to get me across town, and the only food in my fridge was a half-empty bottle of ketchup. So when I saw the ad taped to a streetlight, now hiring, $35 per hour, NIGHTSHIFT. Easy work. I didn't think twice. I tore off the number and called right away. A man picked up on the second ring. His voice was low and smooth, like he already knew I'd be calling. Maggie's Midnight Grub. You want a job? I hesitated. Yeah. I'd like to apply. No application. Just show up at 10 tonight. It was weird, sure. No interview. No questions. But I wasn't in a position to be picky. So at 10 p.m. sharp, I pulled into the nearly empty parking lot of Maggie's Midnight Grub. The diner sat at the edge of a lonely highway, surrounded by nothing but trees and fog. A flickering neon sign hummed above the entrance, its red glow reflecting off my windshield. Inside, the place looked like it had been frozen in time. Black and white checkered floors, vinyl booths, a greasy counter with spinning stools. A jukebox stood in the corner, silent and dusty. The smell of coffee and something fried hung in the air. Only two customers sat inside. A man in a hood, stirring a cup of coffee, and an elderly woman staring blankly at the window. Neither of them looked up when I walked in. Behind the counter, a man stood wiping a glass. He was tall and thin, his uniform crisp and clean, his dark hair combed back neatly. But it was his eyes that stopped me. Deep set, sunken, like he hadn't slept in years. When he smiled, it didn't quite reach them. "You must be John," he said. I nodded. "Yeah, I called earlier." "I know." He set the glass down and extended a bony hand. "I'm Robert, night manager." His grip was ice cold. I glanced around. "So, what exactly do I have to do?" Robert let out a small chuckle. "Not much. Take orders. Serve food. Clean up." He reached under the counter and pulled out a laminated piece of paper. "Oh, and follow the rules." I frowned. "Rules?" He slid the paper toward me. There were only 7 rules printed in bold black letters. 1. If the man in the gray suit enters at exactly 3:15 a.m., take his order, but never look at his face. 2. If the jukebox starts playing Blue Moon, go into the back and don't come out until the song ends. 3. Never serve coffee to the woman in booth 6. She doesn't drink it. 4. If a customer comes in and sits at the counter but doesn't order, do not acknowledge them. 5. The phone will ring at 4:07 a.m. Do not answer it. 6. If Robert tells you to leave early, leave. No questions. 7. Do not, under any circumstances, stay past 6 a.m. I stared at the list. Then at Robert. "Is some kind of joke?" I asked. His smile didn't waver. "Not at all." Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. I glanced at the clock. 10:03 p.m. 6 hours to go. I swallowed hard and slid the rules back across the counter. "All right," I said. "I'll play along." Robert just kept smiling. Good. The first few hours of my shift were quiet. Too quiet. Maggie's Midnight Grub wasn't exactly a busy place, but something about the stillness unsettled me. The only sound were the low hum of the overhead lights and the occasional sizzle from the kitchen. The radio, an old thing mounted above the counter, played a slow, scratchy tune, though I didn't remember turning it on. I stood behind the counter, wiping down the already clean surface, trying to shake the creeping unease settling in my chest. Robert had disappeared into the back, leaving me alone in the front. I kept my eyes on the diner's entrance, half hoping a customer would walk in just to break the silence. And then, right at 2 a.m., she arrived. The bell above the door jingled as a woman stepped inside. She moved strangely, like she was gliding instead of walking. Her clothes were outdated, an old-fashioned dress that looked like something from the 1950s. She had long, dark hair that covered most of her face, and she didn't acknowledge me. She went straight to the booth in the far left corner. The same booth I had noticed earlier, the one with the worn-out leather, as if someone had been sitting there for years. She slid in smoothly, her hands resting on the table. I waited for her to say something, to order, to even look at me. She didn't. I cleared my throat. Hey ma'am, can I get you something?" No answer. Her hands were still, her head slightly tilted downward, as if she were staring at the table. I felt a weird pressure in my chest, like the air had thickened. Something about her posture made my skin crawl. I glanced toward the back, wondering if I should get Robert, but he still hadn't come out. Swallowing my unease, I grabbed my notepad and took a hesitant step forward. "Ma'am." The moment I got closer, the radio cut out with a loud static hiss. I froze. The air turned icy, colder than it had any right to be. I could see my breath fogging up in front of me. A deep, uneasy feeling curled in my stomach. The woman still hadn't moved. The static from the radio grew louder, crackling like distant whispers. My eyes flicked to the jukebox against the wall. It wasn't plugged in. Robert had told me it was broken, but the lights on it flickered, and then, without warning, it started playing. Blue Moon. I took a shaky step back. My mind scrambled, trying to make sense of what was happening. One of the rules: if the jukebox plays Blue Moon, go in the back and don't come out until the song ends. My pulse hammered in my ears. This wasn't normal. None of this was normal. The woman in the booth twitched. Her head jerked slightly, as if she had just registered my presence for the first time. I didn't hesitate. My legs moved before my brain could catch up, carrying me toward the kitchen door. I shoved it open and stumbled inside, heart racing. The door swung shut behind me, sealing me in darkness. I pressed my back against the cold metal of the freezer, listening. The song was still playing, and just beyond the door, I swore I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, stopping right outside. I held my breath. The song continued, each note dragging out like it would never end. Then, silence. I waited. 30 seconds. A minute. 2. Finally, I reached for the door, hand trembling. I pushed it open just an inch, just enough to peek out. The diner was empty. The woman was gone. The only evidence that she had ever been there was the faint scent of something old, dusty, like forgotten places. I let out a shaky breath, stepping fully into the diner. My body was still tense, my skin damp with cold sweat. The radio was playing soft music again, as if nothing had happened. The jukebox sat dark and still, like it had never come alive in the first place. Robert finally emerged from the back, wiping his hands with a rag. He looked at me, then at the empty booth. His expression didn't change. "You follow the rule," he said simply. I nodded, unsure what to say. "Good." He tossed the rag onto the counter and headed toward his office. Just before disappearing inside, he added, "Don't ever break them." The door clicked shut behind him. I stood there, gripping the edge of the counter to steady myself. I had followed the rule, and I still felt like I had barely survived something. I checked the clock. 3:14 a.m. The diner was quiet, the kind of silence that pressed into your ears like thick cotton. The air smelled of stale coffee and burnt grease, but there was something else underneath it, a sharp, metallic scent, like a coin held too long between your fingers. Robert was at the counter, wiping down a coffee mug that was already spotless. He wasn't looking at me, but I had the sense that he was watching anyway. I heard the bell above the door jingle. The man in the gray suit walked in. I felt it before I even saw him, like the air had been sucked out of the room. My chest tightened, and the hair on my arms stood up. The moment he crossed the threshold, the jukebox in the corner let out a distorted hum, like it was trying to wake up, but wasn't quite there yet. I kept my head down, pretending to be busy stacking menus. I didn't need to look to know who it was. Rule 3. If a man in a gray suit enters at exactly 3:15 a.m., take his order, but never look at his face. I swallowed hard. My fingers felt stiff as I grabbed my notepad and walked toward him. He took a seat at the farthest booth, the one near the window. The neon light from the open 24-hour sign outside cast a red glow on the table, making his silhouette look almost unreal, like he was cut out from a different world and pasted into this one. His suit was crisp, not a single wrinkle. His hands, pale and long-fingered, rested on the table. He wore a wedding ring, silver, but dull like it had been buried underground for years. I pulled my pen from behind my ear, my heart thudding. "What can I get you?" I asked, my voice hoarse. A long pause. Then, in a voice as smooth as running water, he said, "Coffee. Black." I wrote it down, nodding. I turned quickly to walk away, to put distance between us. I'd done it. I'd followed the rule. I looked. It wasn't intentional. My eyes just flicked up, just for a second, and I saw his face. The pen slipped from my fingers, clattering onto the floor. My mind couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. His features weren't right. They weren't even there. It was like looking into a reflection in broken glass, warped, shifting, never the same. His mouth curved into a too-wide smile, but I wasn't sure if it had always been there or if it had just appeared when I blinked. The diner groaned. The walls seemed to breathe in, then out. The lights flickered, buzzing angrily. A sharp whisper crawled up my spine. "I see you now." My legs felt locked in place, my body frozen. The man in the gray suit didn't move, but I could feel him stretching toward me, like his presence was seeping into my skin. Then, a firm hand grabbed my shoulder. "Robert." He yanked me backward, so hard I nearly fell. His face was calm, but his grip was like iron. "Go make the coffee, John," he said, his voice quiet, steady. I tore my gaze away and stumbled toward the counter. My hand shook as I fumbled with the coffee pot. From the booth, I could feel the man watching me. I didn't turn around. I didn't dare. I didn't realize I had made a mistake until I stepped outside the diner. At first, everything seemed normal. The air was cold, the parking lot empty except for my car and Robert's. The neon sign buzzed softly, casting a sickly pink glow over the cracked pavement. I felt strange, but I told myself it was just exhaustion. Maybe I was psyching myself out over the whole rules thing. Maybe I imagined what I saw on that man's face. But as I slid into my car and turned the key, I caught something in the rearview mirror. A figure, standing at the edge of the lot, just beyond the reach of the neon light. Tall, motionless, wearing a gray suit. I turned around so fast I nearly gave myself whiplash. But there was nothing there. Just a road stretching into darkness. The diner humming behind me. I let out a breath, shaking my head. My brain was messing with me. Lack of sleep, too much caffeine, and that weird, tense feeling that came with working the graveyard shift. That had to be it. I pulled out of the lot and started driving home. The roads were empty, the way they always were this late at night. The trees lining the highway swayed slightly in the wind, their branches stretching over the road like fingers. My apartment wasn't far, maybe a 15-minute drive. I turned up the radio to fill the silence, but all I got was static. That was when I saw the headlights. In my rearview mirror, a car was following me. The beams were distant at first, barely noticeable, but within minutes, they got closer. Too close. I switched lanes. So did they. I sped up. So did they. My hands tightened on the wheel. I glanced at the mirror again, trying to make out the driver, but the glare of the headlights was too bright. My heart began to thump harder. I told myself it was nothing, just another car on the road. But deep down I knew it wasn't just a car. The diner's rules weren't just some creepy prank. They were warnings. And I had broken one. My apartment complex finally came into view, and I made a sharp turn into the lot. The car behind me didn't follow. I exhaled, trying to steady my breathing. Maybe it really was just some random driver. Maybe I was paranoid. But then I saw it. A shadow, standing under the streetlight near my building. Tall, motionless, wearing a gray suit. My stomach dropped. The streetlight flickered, and for a split second, I saw its face. Or rather, the lack of one. A swirling, shifting void, like looking into a bottomless pit. Then the light went out, and the figure was gone. I didn't remember getting out of my car. I didn't remember running up the stairs, fumbling with my keys, shoving my way into my apartment. But suddenly I was inside, the door locked, my back pressed against it. My breathing was loud in the silence. I waited, listened. Nothing. Minutes passed. Maybe an hour. My body refused to relax. Every shadow in my apartment looked stretched too far, too deep. The silence felt thick, pressing against my ears. Then, from the window, a whisper. "I see you now." I didn't sleep that night. The air outside felt different when I stepped out of my apartment that night. It wasn't colder, wasn't warmer, just off. Like the world had shifted an inch to the left, and I was the only one who noticed. I hadn't slept. Not really. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that face. Or whatever that thing was, sitting in the booth at 3:15 a.m. The man in the gray suit. I hadn't meant to break the rule. I just forgot. And now, something had changed. The diner's neon sign buzzed in the darkness as I pulled into the nearly empty lot. The place looked the same as before, but I knew better now. The diner changed when the sun went down. Robert was already behind the counter when I walked in, wiping a glass with slow, deliberate movements. He didn't look up. I slid onto a stool. My hands felt clammy. Something followed me home last night. Robert placed the glass down carefully, like he was afraid it might shatter. He sighed. I know. That sent a chill through me. What do you mean, you know? You broke a rule. He finally met my eyes. His expression wasn't angry. It wasn't even disappointed. Just tired. And now it knows you. I swallowed hard. What knows me? Robert wiped his hands on a rag and folded it neatly. Then he leaned forward, lowering his voice. You think these rules are some kind of joke? Some dumb initiation test? He shook his head. They're not for you. They're for them. My throat felt dry. Them. Robert nodded toward the back of the diner, where the kitchen door swung slightly open. The overhead light flickered once. The things that come in here at night. The things that sit at our tables, drink our coffee, and pretend to be human. His voice was flat, emotionless. They don't like being noticed. And last night, you noticed. I gripped the counter, tried to keep my breathing steady. So what do? You do what I tell you, Robert said. You follow every rule. To the letter. He studied me for a moment, then added, and if I ever tell you to leave early, you leave. No questions. No hesitation. I stared at him, searching for some kind of explanation. But deep down, I already knew. I'd felt it last night. The heavy silence, the shape outside my window, the way the shadows moved when they shouldn't have. John, Robert said quietly, you don't want to end up like the others. A sharp chill ran down my spine. The others? I whispered. Robert only sighed and went back to wiping the counter. Get to work. I didn't argue, because for the first time since I started, I realized something. I wasn't sure if Robert was trying to protect me, or if he was just waiting for me to fail. I couldn't sleep. Ever since I saw that man's face, or whatever it was, I felt like something was wrong with the world around me. Like reality had a tiny crack running through it. Something I wasn't supposed to see. Shadows stretched too long in my apartment. My reflection in the bathroom mirror seemed to hesitate before moving. The air was colder than it should be. And worst of all, I kept feeling like someone was watching me. I had to know what I'd gotten myself into. I needed answers about Maggie's midnight grub and, more importantly, Robert Graves. The search begins. I started simple. A Google search. Maggie's midnight grub history. At first, nothing came up except a few Yelp reviews and a blurry Facebook page with a grand total of 7 likes. No website. No business history. It was like the place barely existed. Weird. I tried the town's local news archives next. That's when I found something. The first thing that caught my eye was an old missing persons report. Missing. Daniel Carter. Age 27. Last seen. Maggie's midnight grub. Nightshift employee. Date. November 3rd, 2003. I sat up straight. I clicked on the article. It was a short piece, barely more than a paragraph. Daniel Carter had worked the night shift at Maggie's for only 3 weeks before vanishing without a trace. His car was still in the parking lot. His wallet and keys were found inside the diner. No signs of struggle. The case was never solved. I kept digging. Missing. Emily Rhodes. Age 22. Last seen. Maggie's midnight grub. Night shift employee. Date. April 17th, 1996. Another one. Same pattern. Worked nights. Vanished without a trace. The more I searched, the worse it got. 1989. 1984. 1976. Every few years, someone who worked the night shift at Maggie's simply disappeared. No bodies. No suspects. Just gone. And then I found it. The article that made my blood turn to ice. The Robert Graves article. Local diner manager reported missing. Date. August 29th, 1987. Missing. Robert Graves. Age 43. Occupation. Manager of Maggie's midnight grub. I read the name 3 times, my brain refusing to process it. Robert Graves. The same man who had hired me. The same man who stood behind the counter every night, staring at me with those cold, knowing eyes. I clicked on the article. It described how Robert Graves had vanished one night, just like the others. Employees had last seen him locking up. His car was still parked outside. No signs of struggle. But that wasn't possible. Because Robert wasn't missing. He was standing behind the register every damn night, telling me to follow his stupid rules. My hands started shaking. I leaned back in my chair, breathing heavily, trying to make it make sense. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe this was a different Robert Graves. But deep down, I knew the truth. The man who called himself Robert Graves was not human. A visitor in the hallway. I sat in silence for a long time, my mind racing. The glow of my laptop screen was the only light in the room. Outside, the city was dead quiet. Then, I heard something. A soft creak in the hallway outside my apartment door. Slow, deliberate. Someone was standing there. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe evenly. My heart pounded against my ribs as I turned off my laptop screen, plunging the room into darkness. Another creak. Closer this time. I grabbed the nearest thing I could use as a weapon, an old baseball bat from my closet, and tiptoed toward the peephole. I hesitated, then pressed my eye against the glass. Nothing. Just the dimly lit hallway. The old carpet. The flickering ceiling light. Then, the hallway light went out. I took a step back, my breath caught in my throat. My apartment felt suffocatingly small, like the walls were closing in. Something was out there. Something that knew I was looking for answers. And it didn't want to find them. I didn't want to follow Robert's orders. Something in me snapped when he told me to leave early. I'd spent days trying to understand the rules, trying to figure out how this place worked. But now, it felt like I was getting pushed further into some kind of twisted game. A game I didn't want to play anymore. But there was that nagging feeling. The way Robert had looked at me when he said it. That calm, chilling smile that never quite reached his eyes. Something inside me told me I had no choice. I left. At first, the air felt too thick. Almost like the world itself was holding its breath. My footsteps echoed louder than usual on the cracked pavement, and the streetlights flickered as if they were about to go out. My car was parked a few spots down, but as I walked toward it, the feeling of being watched came rushing back. I couldn't shake it. The diner's neon lights flickered behind me, casting a dim, sickly glow. As I slid into the driver's seat and locked the door, I thought I heard something. A soft rustle, like footsteps behind me. I whipped my head around, but there was nothing. Just the diner, sitting there in its eerie stillness. I was being paranoid. It had to be the stress, the rules, the weirdness of this whole place. That's all. But as I backed out of the parking lot and turned onto the empty road, it hit me, the weight of it. I was alone, really alone, for the first time in days. The thought was almost comforting, but then something didn't feel right. It was too quiet, too empty. I glanced in the rearview mirror, and that's when I saw it. A figure, tall, shadowed, walking in the distance. At first, I thought it was just some hitchhiker, but there was something about the way they moved. Like they weren't walking so much as gliding. Too smooth, too deliberate. I had to look again. I don't know why I didn't turn away. Maybe it was the fact that the figure was getting closer, or maybe it was the overwhelming curiosity gnawing at me. But as I stared into the rear view, the figure changed. Its shape warped, stretched, and the air around it shimmered, like it was being sucked into some dark hole I couldn't see. I slammed the gas pedal, the tires screeching as I sped down the road. I didn't dare look back. The image of that thing in the rearview mirror burned in my mind. I could almost feel its presence crawling into my thoughts, pulling at me, urging me to stop, to turn around. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. I didn't care if it was real, or if it was just my mind playing tricks on me. The road stretched ahead, endless and dark, but no matter how fast I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was chasing me. I finally reached the edge of town, my breath coming fast and shallow, my hands white-knuckling the steering wheel. I told myself it was just stress. The diner, the rules, Robert, all of it was starting to get to me. But then, as I drove past the last streetlight before I'd hit open road, I saw it again. The figure. It wasn't in the rearview mirror this time. It was standing at the edge of the road, right in front of me, waiting. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching again, the car jerking to a halt. My heart was pounding in my chest as I stared through the windshield. The figure was still there, unmoving, like it had been placed there on purpose. It was closer now, too close. I wanted to scream. I wanted to turn around, but I couldn't. I couldn't take my eyes off it. The shadow that was not human. It looked like a person at first, but then, its body wasn't right. Long limbs, twisted at unnatural angles. The edges of it were blurry, shifting, like it didn't want to be seen in the way it truly was. For a split second, I thought I saw its face, a deep, endless void, just like the man in the gray suit. I blinked, and it was gone. I didn't know how I got back to my apartment. 1 minute, I was on that road, and the next, I was parked outside my building, hands trembling as I cut the engine. My stomach was a tight knot, my mind still spinning. I couldn't breathe. I had to get out of here, away from everything, away from that diner, that shadow Robert. But just before I stepped out of the car, I heard something. A whisper. Barely a sound, but it cut through the silence like a blade. You broke the rule. The voice was low. It crawled on my spine, turning the air cold. My head snapped to the side, but there was no one there. I bolted inside, locking every door behind me. But the feeling didn't leave. It never did. I'd had enough. Every night I stayed at Maggie's midnight grub. The place felt more and more like a prison. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, not just by Robert, but by the diner itself. The rules, the strange figures in the windows, the coldness that filled the room, even when the heaters were running. It all pointed to something wrong. That night, I couldn't take it anymore. I walked up to Robert as he stood by the register, looking like he always did, calm, cool, like he wasn't human. My hands were shaking, my voice was steady, but I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. "Robert," I said, forcing the words out. "What is this place? What the hell is going on here? You're not human, are you?" He didn't flinch. His eyes stayed fixed on mine, like he already knew what I was going to ask. Like he knew what I was about to say before I even said it. "You're right," he said, his voice low, almost soothing. But there was an edge to it, something that made my spine tingle with unease. "I'm not." I couldn't breathe for a second. The air in the diner suddenly felt thicker, suffocating. I wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't move. The jukebox in the corner hummed quietly, almost like it was waiting for something to happen. Robert stepped closer to me. The smell of stale coffee and something metallic wafted over. His presence swallowed the room. "I was once like you," he continued, voice almost a whisper now, working the night shift. "Desperate. Broke. I took the job because I needed the money, just like you." I swallowed, trying to fight the dizziness creeping up on me. I didn't want to hear this. I didn't want to know what came next. But my body wouldn't let me walk away. I had to hear it. He leaned in, his lips brushing my ear. Then I stayed past my shift. I froze. The words hit me like a slap, but the silence after was even worse. The weight of it dragged me under. "Stayed. Past your shift." I choked out, the words thick on my tongue. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer right away. He just stared at me, like he was deciding whether or not to let me in on something terrible, something I wasn't supposed to know. Finally, he spoke, his voice now even softer, like a secret. "You see, John, the diner doesn't just hire you. It doesn't let you go. Once you've crossed the line, you become part of it." I wanted to laugh, to call him crazy, but something in his eyes told me this wasn't some joke. It wasn't some game. This wasn't just a creepy old diner with a weird night manager. "The rules," he said, looking at the clock on the wall like it was marking the passage of time. "They keep you here. Every single one of them. They know when you break them. And once you break them, once they have you," he let the sentence hang in the air like a guillotine waiting to fall. "You become part of the diner. It takes you, John. It won't let you go." I felt my stomach drop. It was like I was floating above my own body, watching this conversation play out from a distance. But it was real. Too real. I didn't know what to say. My mind raced in circles. Robert had been here for who knows how long. He never aged. He never left. And now I understood why. He wasn't working a night shift. He was stuck. I don't understand," I said, desperate to cling to the world I knew. "How do I get out of here, Robert? How do I leave?" He smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile a person gives you. It was sharp, too sharp, like he was in on a secret I would never understand. "You don't," he said, and his voice dropped even lower. "Once you've stayed, once the diner has you in its grip, it's over. You either work here until the end of time, or you become one of the things that watches, that waits." A cold, clammy sweat broke out across my forehead. The walls of the diner seemed to close in on me, the flickering neon lights casting strange, long shadows. For the first time since I'd started this job, I wasn't just scared. I was trapped. I can't," I whispered, my throat tight. "I'm not staying here. I'm leaving. Tonight." Robert didn't look at me. He just turned slowly, his back to me now. "That's the problem, John. You think you can leave. But you can't. And when you break that last rule, you'll see it." I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to know what he meant. But I couldn't help myself. "See what?" He didn't answer. His voice drifted back to me, distant but clear. The diner will show you what happens to those who stay too long. The temperature dropped. My breath caught in my chest. There was something behind me. I could feel it. The diner had already claimed me. And now, there was no turning back. I stood in the dim glow of the diner's neon lights. My eyes locked on the clock above the kitchen door. 3 a.m. The deadliest hour. I could feel it creeping closer. The thing that followed me home last night. It wasn't just in my head. I knew it. I wasn't imagining the shadows that twisted on the walls or the cold that wouldn't leave me. There was something in this diner, something ancient, and it had its claws in me now. I glanced over at Robert. He was leaning on the counter, his cold, gray eyes scanning the room with an eerie stillness. Like always, he was the picture of composure, but I knew better. The air around him seemed to press in on me, and the hum of the jukebox had taken on a deeper tone, almost like it was alive. Watching. Robert, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm done with this. I'm leaving. He didn't even look up. Just kept cleaning a glass with slow, deliberate motions. Leaving isn't up to you, John. His voice was low, controlled, but something in it made my skin crawl. Once you're here for good. You broke the rules. Now, the diner owns you. The words hit me like a punch, but I wasn't backing down. I had to leave. I had to. I couldn't keep living like this. Couldn't keep feeling this presence over my shoulder every damn second. I had to find a way out. I turned away from him, pretending like I was going to check the coffee pot. My mind raced. I needed to act, but I couldn't just run out the door like a scared kid. The diner would never let me go. It had a hold on me, tighter than I cared to admit, and I couldn't just walk away. No, I needed a plan. It was then that I saw it. The small door to the basement, half hidden behind a stack of crates in the corner. I'd never been down there. It was part of the rules. No one was supposed to go into the basement. Robert had told me that the first night I'd started working here, his eyes flashing with something that made my throat tighten. I had a feeling it wasn't just some storage space down there. No, it was probably where the real answers were buried. If there was anything I could use to get out of this hellhole, it was down there. I just had to figure out how to get down there without Robert noticing. I wiped my hands on my apron, glancing toward the clock. 3:10 a.m. I could hear the sound of someone humming from the corner booth. The woman who'd been there every night at this hour. She never moved, but tonight, her humming was louder, almost as if it was directed at me. I didn't have time to think about her. Not yet. I walked slowly toward the back door, trying to keep my steps quiet, but the floorboards creaked beneath me with every step. I cursed under my breath, hoping Robert wouldn't hear. As I reached the door, I felt the weight of the eyes on me. They were everywhere, watching. I had no choice but to act fast. I grabbed the door handle, ready to slip into the back alley. That's when I heard Robert's voice, low but clear. "Where are you going, John?" I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. He wasn't looking at me. He didn't need to. He knew everything. "Just taking a break," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Uh-huh," he murmured. "Taking a break from what exactly?" I couldn't make a run for it. I couldn't go outside. I had to get to the basement. I turned on my heel, swallowing the bile rising in my throat, and walked slowly toward the back. "Where are you going now?" Robert's voice was colder, like a shadow slithering up my spine. I forgot something in the kitchen," I said, forcing a smile that I prayed he couldn't see through. The humming from the woman in the booth grew louder, almost unbearable. I could feel her eyes on me too, like the rest of them. Everyone was watching me, waiting to see if I'd break. I reached the basement door, my hand shaking as I touched the knob. It felt strangely warm to the touch, almost like it was alive. Robert was still watching me, but I had to take a chance. "I'll be back," I said, glancing over my shoulder. I wasn't even sure if I believed it. Without waiting for a response, I pushed the door open and stepped into the darkness. The smell hit me first, old, damp, and musty. It was a stark contrast to the sterile, antiseptic scent of the diner. The air was thick, like the basement had been sealed away for years. My shoes clicked against the cold concrete floor as I took cautious steps forward. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was down here, something that didn't want me to be here. But I had no choice. I had to find something, anything that could break the rules. If I didn't, I was stuck here forever. I reached the back wall, where a flickering light cast strange shadows across the floor. There, tucked beneath a pile of old boxes and crates, I saw it, a wooden chest. It looked ancient, the kind of thing that belonged in a haunted house, not a diner. But it was what I was looking for. My gut told me this was where the answers were hidden. I knelt down, brushing dust off the top of the chest. There was no lock, no key. It was just open. Hesitantly, I lifted the lid. Inside, I found a small leather-bound book, its pages yellowed with age. I picked it up carefully, but as soon as I did, a strange warmth radiated through my hands, as if the book itself was alive. I opened it, and the words inside were scrawled in ink that shimmered faintly in the dim light. The first page read, "Rules are not meant to be broken. They are meant to bind. You broke the rules. Now you must pay the price." I slammed the book shut, my pulse racing. There was no going back now. I had to finish what I'd started, no matter what it cost me. I had no idea how I was going to get out of this, but I was done being the diner's pawn. It was time to end it. The problem was, I wasn't sure if the diner would let me. I stood up, heart hammering in my chest. I was ready, but I knew this. Whatever came next, I couldn't do it alone. The flames crackled behind me, their heat stinging my skin. The diner, once familiar, now felt like a trap, like a living thing, angry and thrashing as it felt the fire. The smoke curled around me, thick and suffocating, but I couldn't look away from the wreckage I'd started. It was the only way. I had no choice. I could feel the pull of the diner, trying to wrap itself around me again, to drag me back into its grip, but I was determined to break free. The fire spread quickly, licking at the corners of the walls, crawling across the floor. The neon sign outside flickered in a strange rhythm, almost like it was trying to warn me, or maybe it was mocking me. I could hear the crackling of the flames, the hiss of something inside the walls giving way. From the back of my mind, there was another sound, the sound of footsteps. Slow, measured. I didn't need to turn around to know who they belonged to. "That won't do anything, John." Robert's voice came from behind me, smooth and calm, like he was talking about the weather. I didn't turn, didn't even flinch. I couldn't afford to. I had to focus. I had to finish this. "You think burning this place down will set you free?" His words slipped under my skin, cold and unsettling. "You're just another lost soul, John, just like I was." I took a deep breath, pushing the fear down. The flames were eating at the diner, but it wasn't enough. It never would be. Robert knew that, too. I could hear his footsteps now, closer, too close. He was right behind me. "I can't just walk away, can I?" I said, my voice tight, strained. The smoke was getting to my head. The air was thick, burning my lungs. But I wasn't going to let that stop me. "You could," Robert said, his voice too soft, too knowing. "But you won't. Not anymore." I could feel his presence like a weight, pressing against me, trying to suffocate the will to fight. I didn't turn to face him. I couldn't. He wasn't just a man anymore. He was the diner. He was everything that made this place what it was. He was the rule book. He was the reason why nobody ever left. I closed my eyes, not because I wanted to escape, but because I needed to concentrate. There had to be a way. The fire was spreading fast now, but it felt like it wasn't enough. The diner wasn't burning like it should. It was resisting, like it knew what I was trying to do. "You can't destroy what's already dead, John." Robert's voice was closer now. "You're trapped, just like the others. We all are." I turned then, just enough to look at him, to see his eyes, cold, empty, full of something that didn't belong in a human face. It was like looking into a mirror that had shattered and reformed, broken and twisted beyond recognition. "I'm not like you," I said, my voice rough but firm. "I'm not staying. I won't let this place take me." Robert smiled, but it wasn't the smile of a man. It was something far darker. His lips twisted unnaturally, and I saw something behind his eyes, something ancient, something hungry. The diner was alive, breathing with a pulse that matched the rhythm of my own racing heart. "You don't get it, do you?" he said, stepping closer. His breath was like ice, chilling me even from a distance. "You'll never leave. This place doesn't let go. You're already one of us, John. You can fight it. You can burn it all down, but it will always find you. We'll always find you." The walls trembled as if they were alive, the floor groaning beneath my feet. The fire was no longer just flames. It was the diner, trying to fight back, trying to stop me. The windows began to distort, the glass warping, bending, and then, suddenly, shattering. A cold wind rushed in, carrying with it the smell of something rotten, something that shouldn't exist. I felt it, the pull, the pressure, the weight of everything that had happened since I first stepped foot in this place. It wasn't just Robert the First was fighting. It was the diner itself. It was the rules, the curse, the hunger that had consumed everyone who'd come before me. I was already marked, and that's when I realized there was no escape. I couldn't burn the diner down. I couldn't leave. The diner wouldn't let me. It didn't matter how much I fought, how much I wanted to break free. The truth was too clear now. This place owns me. I turned back toward the fire. There was no other choice. No way out. Robert was watching me, his cold eyes never leaving me, as if he were waiting for me to finally understand. And I did. The diner had already won. "Welcome home, John," Robert said, his voice like a whisper in my ear. "It's always been you, hasn't it? Welcome to your shift." And in that moment, as the flames roared behind me, I understood. I was never going to leave. The diner claimed me now, just like it claimed Robert, just like it claimed everyone who'd come before me. I was one of them. Forever.